Over the next 40 minutes, this video will deconstruct the exact psychology of history's greatest conquerors. From the freezing Alps with Hannibal to the deadly patience of Vladimir Lenin, Napoleon, Alexander, Caesar, the brutal reality of power, nature, and the mindset required to survive it. Do not skip a single minute of this, because if you cannot sit for 40 minutes to learn from history, you are not fit to be even close to the leagues of great men in it. At the very end of this video, the exact hidden organizational blueprint used to quietly topple a global empire in 1917, without firing a single shot, will also be revealed. To even get to understanding execution at such complex levels, you must understand the board first. 218 BC. Hannibal's army stood at the foot of the Alps, with elephants that had never seen snow and men who had never seen mountains. There was no map, no scout had gone ahead and returned with good news. The Carthaginian officers pressed him to winter in Gaul, to wait for spring, to let the weather decide instead of the man. Hannibal crossed anyway. Men died on the ice. Pack animals went over the edge in the dark. And when his army came down the other side into Italy, what waited for Rome wasn't a battered force that had gotten lucky. It was an army that had already survived the worst thing that could happen to it, led by a man who had walked them through it and brought most of them out the other side. Cannae followed. Rome lost more men in a single afternoon than in almost any battle in its history. And the legions that broke that day weren't broken by tactics alone. They were broken by the fact that Hannibal's men no longer feared anything Rome could do to them, because they had already feared the mountain, and the mountain hadn't killed them. 1900 years later, Napoleon stood at the same range with the same problem. His marshals told him the passes were unusable until the snow cleared. He moved 40,000 men through the Great St. Bernard Pass in May anyway. Cannons disassembled and dragged on sledges, soldiers pulling artillery upgrades that mules refused to climb. He came down into the Po Valley, behind the Austrian army, who believed, correctly, by every rule of military logic, that no one moves an army through that pass in that season. Marengo followed. And what followed Marengo wasn't just a battlefield win. It was the moment the rest of Europe understood that this man did not play by the rules that govern hesitation. Here is the actual mechanism underneath both stories. Stripped of the romance and harmony as a system, left alone, under pressure, with no clear outcome. In sight, every system drifts toward disorder, morale erodes. Rumor spreads faster than information. Doubt compounds. This is entropy. Not as metaphor, but as the literal tendency of any complex structure to decay into noise unless something actively fights to hold its shape. Most commanders manage entropy by minimizing exposure to it. They wait for better information. They wait for spring. Waiting feels like prudence, and most of the time it is. But waiting also has a cost. That doesn't show up on a ledger. Every day spent waiting is a day the system bleeds order on its own, with nobody steering the bleed. What Hannibal and Napoleon did was different in kind, not degree. They walked directly into the highest entropy environment available, voluntarily, without certainty of outcome. And they did it in front of everyone whose loyalty they needed. That second part matters more than the crossing itself. An army doesn't follow a man because he is brave in private. It follows him because it watched him take the system into chaos and bring it out the other side, still recognizable as an army. The corrosion was visible. The frostbite was visible. The lost elephants were visible. And the man at the front of it didn't flinch in a way anyone could see, even if he was corroding on the inside the entire time. That visibility converts directly into the kind of loyalty that doesn't require explanation, the kind that doesn't ask. Why are we doing this anymore? Because the question already got answered on a mountain in front of witnesses. This is the part almost nobody studying power actually internalizes. The corrosion is real. Facing entropy at that scale does damage. Doubt erodes a man's certainty, the same way it erodes an army's morale. Because the commander is also a system, and systems decay under uncertainty regardless of rank. The difference between the men history remembers and the men it forgets is not that the remembered ones felt no corrosion. It's that they had built something inside themselves capable of absorbing that corrosion without the whole structure collapsing. That capacity is not a personality trait you're born with. It's closer to infrastructure. It has to be built deliberately. The same way an army builds supply lines before a campaign rather than during one. So here is the structural version of this. The part that's actually usable rather than just inspiring. First, identify where your current order is rented rather than owned. Most positions of authority look stable because routine is propping them up. Not because the people underneath have actually metabolized why they follow. That kind of order evaporates the moment a real disruption hits, because nobody has ever watched the leader operate without the routine. The fix is not waiting for a crisis to reveal this. The fix is finding small, controlled, high-entropy situations and walking into them on purpose. A founder who has never made a decision with incomplete information in front of his team is operating on rented authority. The first real crisis will either mint his command or expose it, and there's no controlling which. Second, build the recovery system before you need it, not after. Napoleon could move through St. Bernard Pass and recover quickly because the logistics behind him. Supply chains, the secondary commanders, the administrative machine he'd built in Paris, were absorbing entropy on every other front while he spent his personal reserve on the crossing. Power that survives repeated exposure to chaos is rarely the result of one man having infinite personal resilience. It's the result of a system designed so that only one variable is under maximum stress at a time. Anyone facing entropy without that kind of structural backup is not being brave. They're spinning down a finite account with no deposits coming in. Third, decisiveness under incomplete information has to be trained the way a muscle is trained. In small, repeated doses, because the instinct to wait for more data is the instinct that creates the rented authority in the first place. Every time a decision gets delayed until the information is complete, the muscle for acting without complete information atrophies a little more. The skill that actually matters. In command, the one that both Hannibal and Napoleon possessed in a way their contemporaries didn't, was the ability to act on 60% certainty and absorb whatever the other 40% turned out to cost. That is trainable in low-stakes environments, specifically so it's available in high-stakes ones. Fourth, the crossing has to be witnessed, or it doesn't convert into loyalty. This is the leverage point that gets missed constantly, because it looks like vanity from the outside. A man who suffers privately and succeeds privately gains nothing in terms of the system around him, because the system never saw the corrosion or the survival of it. The crossing only pays its dividend in loyalty if the people whose trust you need were close enough to watch you not break. This doesn't mean theater, it means proximity. Leaders who insulate themselves from the people they lead during the actual hard part of a campaign, who manage the crisis from a comfortable remove, never get the crushing version of the victory afterward. They get a functional outcome and nothing more, because nobody watched them survive anything. Fifth, and this is the part that separates the existential reading of this from the trivial one. None of this is about being impressive in the way a disciplined morning routine is impressive, or the way hitting a deadline under pressure is impressive. Those are small, recoverable stakes. What Hannibal and Napoleon were doing at the base of those mountains was staking their actual continuity, the literal survival of the thing they had built their identity around, against an outcome they could not predict. The corrosion they absorbed wasn't stress in the everyday sense. It was closer to a controlled confrontation with their own potential erasure, the possibility that the army, the campaign, the entire shape of who they were about to become, simply didn't make it to the other side of the mountain. Facing that and still functioning, still making clear decisions, still projecting enough certainty that thousands of frightened men kept walking behind you into snow, is not a productivity hack. It's a different category of act entirely. This is why the victory on the other side was never just tactical. Canny and Marengo were devastating because the men fighting them had already passed through something that should have devastated them first, and didn't. The enemy was fighting soldiers. The soldiers were fighting nothing, because they had already faced the thing that should have broken them, and walked out the other side still intact. That is the actual content of power at this scale, not the absence of entropy. The proof, witnessed by everyone who needed to see it, that entropy met you directly, and you were still standing when it was over. The mountain doesn't care who you are. It corrodes everyone the same amount. The only variable in the entire equation is what's left of you when you reach the other side, and whether the people who watched you cross decide, from that point forward, that they would follow you into anything. Most men die twice. Once when the body gives out, and again when the last person who remembers them stops speaking their name. The second death arrives faster for almost everyone. The ones this concerns do not receive the second death. Their names become architecture, load-bearing words in how civilization understands what is possible. History does not move in currents. It moves in detonations. Decades of stagnation. Then one man decides something, and everything reorganizes around that decision. Historians arrive afterward and construct a narrative of inevitability around what was actually a single, conscious, aggressive act of will. They call it timing. They call it circumstance. The man himself would call it a long-held intention, finally meeting its moment. The question is not who that man is. The question is what structure of thinking produces him. Destiny without architecture is delusion. Every would-be great man who failed had the feeling, the burning sense that they were meant for something disproportionate to their station. That feeling is nearly universal in men who think at all. What separated the ones who moved history from the ones who merely felt like they should have was a philosophical framework so internally consistent it could absorb contradiction. Setback and the sustained contempt of the world without structural collapse. Not optimism, not resilience. A fortress of logic around a fixed internal objective that no external pressure could breach. Caesar was not confident because things were going well. He was confident because his map of reality was more accurate than his enemy's map, and he knew it. He spent years building that accuracy in obscurity, studying, losing, being captured by pirates, paying the ransom with pleasantries, then hunting them down and executing every one after he was free. That was not temperament. That was a man testing his philosophical architecture in real conditions. Does it hold under pressure? Does it produce results when deployed against actual resistance? He updated where the logic failed and continued moving toward an internally fixed point. The internally fixed point is the thing, not the goal in the conventional sense, not the title or the territory or the achievement. The internally fixed point is a specific quality of reality the man intends to bring into existence. Abstract enough to survive the destruction of any particular plan, concrete enough to serve as judgment criterion for every decision. Men who operate without it are reactionary. They respond to the world as it presents itself, treating each event as a new problem rather than as material for the objective. Men who operate with it are structurally different. Every event, defeat, windfall, betrayal, becomes input. How does a man arrive at the internally fixed point? Some are born into proximity to it. Some read their way into it. But the most dangerous category, historically the most disruptive, are the men who arrive at it through a violent internal rupture in the middle of an apparently ordinary life. The man who realizes his destiny at 38 is more dangerous than the man who knew at 18. Because the older man has information the younger man lacks. He has watched enough cycles complete to understand where leverage actually lives, not where it appears to live. When he commits, he commits without the waste of a man who has never been truly broken. Here is the structural paradox at the center of this observation. Men who looked destined from the beginning often end up decorative. They peak early because early success calcifies the thinking that produced it. They stop updating the map because the map seemed to work, and the ego fills in the rest. Meanwhile, the apparent failures are still updating. They have no choice. Nothing is working, so everything stays in question. A system that must update to survive becomes adaptive. A system that succeeds too early becomes brittle. This is not philosophical abstraction. It is a mechanical property of how thinking responds to sustained pressure versus sustained reward. The man who decides, at whatever age, that he is going to move in the direction of something historically significant begins with friction elimination, not optimization. Friction elimination is structurally different. Optimization assumes the current path is correct and asks how to move faster on it. Friction elimination questions whether the path exists for a reason that still applies, and removes everything that does not serve the fixed point. Most of what men call discipline is actually friction that survived because no one questioned it. The man who would reshape something, a market, an institution, a civilization, maps every activity against one question. Does this apply pressure toward the fixed point, or does it not? The ones that do not are eliminated, delegated, or engineered out of the system entirely. The result, from the outside, looks like obsession. From the inside, it is simply a life where the direction of force has been unified. A man with one thing is more dangerous than a man with 10. Not because focus is virtuous, but because compounding only works in one direction. Compounding is the most misunderstood concept in strategy. Everyone understands financial compounding. Almost no one applies its mechanics to influence, reputation, and institutional power. A man who compounds correctly is not adding resources. He is multiplying the productivity of every prior resource with each new one. The knowledge from one domain applied to another does not add. It restructures the second domain entirely, and the restructuring creates a new surface for the next idea to land on. This is why the great man uses every idea, not intellectual voraciousness. He understands that every idea is a tool. Tools exist to apply force, and force applied at the right point changes the structure of everything downstream of it. Systems thinking is the discipline of finding where force changes structure rather than merely moves mass. The man who does not think in systems applies force and gets proportional results. The man who does is not asking what will this do, he is asking what will the changed system then do on its own. This separates the historically significant from the merely successful. Success can be achieved by grinding against resistant systems. Historical significance requires changing systems so they grind for you. The man who operates this way is not popular in the early phases. Popularity requires giving people what they already want. The man with a fixed objective gives people what the objective requires, which is sometimes what they want and often not. He builds alliances of interest, not alliances of affection. Interest alliances are more durable. A man who is allied because he wants the same outcome stays through difficulty. A man who is allied because he likes someone leaves when the cost gets high enough. The great man manages this by being ruthlessly clear about the exchange. Not cruel clear. He knows what he offers and what he expects in return, and structures each relationship so both parties benefit from the objective advancing. Manipulation obscures the exchange. This is the opposite, making the exchange so visible and so obviously beneficial that resistance dissolves before it organizes. There is a category of resistance that does not dissolve. Structural resistance, people and systems, whose existence depends on the current order remaining unchanged. The great man does not fight structural resistance directly. Direct conflict with it is expansive and often terminal. He roots around it, makes it irrelevant, or transforms the incentive structure so that the resistant parties become participants. Napoleon did not defeat European aristocracy by arguing with it. He offered it a deal: participate in the new structure or be consumed by it. Most participated. The ones who didn't were destroyed not by Napoleon personally, but by the logic of the system he had built, which now moved against them automatically. Automatic systems are the end point. The man who must apply manual pressure to every outcome is limited by his biology. The man who designs systems that apply pressure automatically has multiplied himself beyond those limits. Building structures, social, institutional, procedural, that continue doing work after the initial construction is the deepest lever available. Most men misuse enemies entirely. An enemy who is visible and consistent is a resource. He defines the boundary of the territory, forces clarity about what is worth defending, and gives the political environment a structure it would otherwise lack. The great man often cultivates the right enemy the same way he cultivates the right ally deliberately, with full understanding of what role that opposition plays in the overall system. An enemy who attacks from the wrong angle legitimizes the man attacked to every audience that finds that angle repellent. The attack does work that did not need to be done personally. The open question this raises: if enemies are cultivatable and alliances are structural rather than personal, what distinguishes the great man's relationships from pure calculation? They are not distinguished. The calculation is the relationship. Sentiment is noise in a system designed for scale. The great man is rarely the most powerful person in a room in terms of declared resources. He is almost always the most informed. Information asymmetry compounds. Each piece of intelligence reduces the cost of the next decision, which frees resources for intelligence gathering, which reduces cost again. Most men are information poor, not because intelligence is scarce, but because they build no systems to collect and process it. They react to what surfaces, rather than hunting what is buried. The great man builds intelligence infrastructure before he needs it, understanding that the moment he needs it is already too late to build it. He is particularly interested in the gap between what people say and what they do, and between what institutions claim to optimize for and what they actually optimize for. Those gaps are where every real opportunity in any system lives, undiscovered and uncontested. Institutions are the accumulated decisions of men who came before. They contain leverage no single man could generate from scratch and resistance no single man can overcome directly. The great man's relationship with institutions is never confrontational at the beginning. It is infiltrative. He finds the institution's existing momentum and positions his objective downstream of it, so the institution's natural movement carries him forward. Only after he is load-bearing within it does he begin redirecting its momentum. By that point, removing him would require the institution to stop a cost it will rarely pay. The question that will not resolve here: at what point does this capacity emerge? Is it teachable, or only realizable by a certain type of consciousness under specific conditions of pressure? The Stoics spent 5 centuries developing curriculum for exactly this kind of thinking and produced Marcus Aurelius, arguably the most powerful man in the world for 20 years, who used his power with a precision that still resists adequate explanation. The curriculum existed. Others went through it and became competent philosophers. One man went through it and ran an empire from inside a fortress, mentality so complete that nothing penetrated it: plague, war, the behavior of his own son. The curriculum did not produce Marcus Fontaine. In Marcus used the curriculum as material for something that was already trying to fall. This is the mechanic. The great man does not learn in order to know. He learns in order to arm the fixed point. Every book, every conversation, every failure, every conflict is a weapons delivery. The point is already there. The learning builds the armory. Knowledge without a fixed point is education. Knowledge with a fixed point is strategy. After that distinction clarifies, and there is always a moment of clarification, not a gradual drift, everything changes in structure. The man begins selecting environments, not for comfort or conventional advancement, but for the quality of friction they provide against the objective. He goes where the resistance between his intention and current reality is highest, because that friction is the diagnostic. It reveals the gap between the map and the territory. Avoiding it keeps the map apparently accurate. Moving toward it continuously corrects the map, continuously updates the method, continuously closes the gap between intention and result. Seek friction with the objective, not friction generally. Random difficulty is noise. Targeted friction, the specific resistance standing between the fixed point and its realization, is the sharpest refinement tool available. This is the mechanism that separates productive suffering from mere suffering, and it is the one the great man never stops applying to himself. There is a final, structural property that governs all of this. The great man's relationship with time is architecturally different from the ordinary man's. The ordinary man experiences time as pressure, days accumulating against him, urgency without direction. The man with a fixed objective and a system for advancing it experiences time as material. Each day is a unit of construction. The urgency is directional. Pressure forges rather than destroys. Men who have been broken and rebuilt understand this. Physically, before the breaking, time is atmospheric. After, it becomes structural. Every day is used like a tool, rather than endured like weather. The history books compress out the quality of the daily architecture entirely. They write about battles, speeches, pivotal decisions. They skip the decade of building a thinking system so precise that when the decisive moment came, the decision was not a decision at all. It was a conclusion the system had already reached, waiting for the moment to execute. The great man does not rise to the occasion. He was already there. The occasion made the fact visible, and the irony that hangs over all of it, the one history cannot answer but keeps posing. The man who builds this structure cannot know, in the years of construction, whether he is building the real thing or a cathedral to his own delusion. Both feel identical from the inside. Both require the same architecture. Both demand the same cost. The deluded man and the man who will change history run the same internal program for years before the results diverge. The difference only becomes visible at the end, which means the work has to be done under permanent uncertainty. And the permanence of that uncertainty is itself the final test of whether the fixed point is real, or whether the man is simply the most disciplined kind of fool, which until the last chapter are indistinguishable. In the winter of 1916, a man named Vladimir lived above a shoemaker's shop in Zurich. Broke, half forgotten, trailed by police who no longer bothered being subtle because nobody believed he mattered enough to justify the effort. He wrote pamphlets that nobody printed. He addressed rooms with more empty chairs than listeners. Months before it happened, he told a circle of young socialists he doubted he would live to see a revolution in Russia. 14 months later, he stepped off a sealed train into Petrograd, and within the year he commanded the largest territorial state on the planet. He didn't build that power in 1917. He built it across 27 years of exile. Theory, faction, discipline, an organizational doctrine that almost nobody outside a few hundred people thought worth watching. The empire fell in weeks. The man had been ready for decades. History happens in weeks, but only for the people who spent the decades aiming at the right week. That gap between the two timelines is the entire problem. Closing it requires a structural mapping of power. The threat is the institution itself, theater designed to act as an obstacle, keeping ambitious men busy, extended, and ultimately powerless. The tactical objective is to bypass that theater and locate the exact node where real leverage pools, so that by the time the calendar turns, your hands are already on the controls. Here is how that map is drawn. The intention is always to bend an institution toward your own design. Your workplace, your university, your community. The immediate obstacle is scale. A man's thinking has already arrived at the scale of the change he wants to make, but his actual reach hasn't left the building he works in. He sees the whole board, but he can only move one pawn, badly. On a corner, nobody's watching. This mismatch produces exactly two stupid responses, and most ambitious men cycle through both before they learn better. The first is shouting. He starts performing the scale of his ambition before he has the substance to back it. Broadcasting opinions on a structure he has no actual grip on, spending his only renewable resource credibility on arguments that change nothing because nobody with the power to change anything is listening. Noise feels like progress. It is the opposite. It announces your position to the people who will later block you, and it teaches everyone around you to file you under talks. It holds nothing. The second failure is despair. He concludes the gap is permanent, that the distance between his vision and his rank is evidence the vision was delusional, and he quietly downgrades his own ambition to match his current leverage. This is the more common death. It doesn't look like failure from the outside. It looks like maturity, like settling down, like getting realistic. It's just resignation, wearing a more respectable coat. There's a third option, and it's the only one that compounds. An octopus has roughly 500 million neurons, and most of them aren't in its head. They're distributed through its arms, each one capable of semi-independent action, reaching, gripping, tasting the water for prey the central brain hasn't even processed yet. But the eyes stay central. The eyes don't grip anything. They don't taste anything. Their entire function is to track the wider scene the arms can't yet reach, so that when an arm finally extends, it extends toward something already located, already understood, already chosen. The arms do the gripping. The eyes do the choosing. And the eyes were never built to panic about how short the arms currently are. Your tentacles are your direct capacity to act on the world. Your title, your capital, your team, your audience, your formal authority. They are slow. They only extend as far as years of accumulated work. Let them extend, and no act of will shortens that timeline. Your eyes are your attention, your map of how a structure actually works, your understanding of where its real decisions get made. Eyes cost nothing but discipline, and they can range anywhere immediately, regardless of your current rank, your salary, or whether anyone in the building knows your name. Here is the part almost nobody tells you. Power inside any institution, a company, a party, a market, a church, a nation, does not sit evenly across its surface. It pools every large structure. No matter how sprawling its org chart looks, has a small number of points where a disproportionate share of consequential decisions actually get made. A single committee, a single relationship, a single budget line, a single piece of legacy infrastructure nobody dares touch, a single person whose signature triggers everything downstream. Everywhere else in the structure is theater. Title without proximity to that node is decoration. Status without proximity to that node is a costume. Skill that separates men who eventually move history from men who spend a lifetime busy is the ability to locate that node years before they have any business being near it. And then to keep their eyes locked on it without flinching, without resentment, and without trying to force their way toward it before their actual capability has caught up. Locating it is mostly a matter of refusing to be fooled by the formal chart. You trace decisions backward instead of forward, not who holds the title, but whose objection actually stops something, whose approval actually starts something. whose absence actually delays something. You do this quietly, as the lowest person in the room, taking note of which names recur in every real turning point, regardless of which names recur on the letterhead. Then you watch for the calendar. Most people never think to keep the calendar of transitions. Institutions don't change gradually. They change at specific, somewhat predictable seams. A succession, a funding cycle running dry, a generational handoff, a technology making the old gatekeepers obsolete, a war exhausting the old order's legitimacy. Most of an institution's life is just maintenance of the existing arrangement. The actual openings, the moments where the structure becomes plastic enough for a single well-placed person to redirect it, are narrow and they are scheduled by forces outside your control. Your job for years is not to force one open. Your job is to know exactly when the next one is likely to arrive, and to be standing closer to it than anyone else when it does. This is where most ambitious men sabotage themselves without noticing. They mistake general prestige for proximity to the node. They collect followers, credentials, a louder voice, a bigger title in a department that was never close to the real lever. And they call this progress, because it's measurable and it feels good, and other people congratulate them for it. None of it transfers. The morning the real opening arrives, they discover they spent a decade building reach in the wrong direction. Tentacles fully extended toward a part of the ocean nothing important ever passes through. The corrective discipline is brutal and simple. Every unit of effort gets tested against one question. Does this bring me closer to the specific node? Or does it just make me feel like I'm doing something? Side arguments you can't yet win. Audiences that admire you, but can't promote you. Fights over territory adjacent to the real lever, but not on it, all of it gets cut. Not because it's bad in the abstract, but because attention is the one resource you have that doesn't grow with effort. And every hour spent on the adjacent thing is an hour not spent sharpening your read on the real one. Protecting that attention has to be close to ruthless, not occasionally disciplined, ruthless. The men who eventually move structures are, almost without exception, strangely boring to be around for the 10 years before it happens, because they said no to nearly everything that wasn't the node. There's an older case than Lenin's that demonstrates this exact loop of intention and obstacle. Talleyrand had one objective: to control France's relationship with the rest of Europe. The obstacle was 5 successive regimes that hated each other, surviving the fall of the monarchy, the terror, the Directory, the Empire, and the Restoration, while colleagues who'd been louder, more principled, more visibly committed to any single cause, were imprisoned or executed in the gaps between governments. He wasn't loyal to factions. He was loyal to one node. Whichever institution currently held actual legitimacy to negotiate France's relationship with the rest of Europe. Regimes changed underneath him constantly. The node didn't move. His eyes never left it, even while his formal position changed costumes 5 times. This is what frictionless compounding actually looks like from the inside. It isn't dramatic. For most of the timeline, it looks like nothing is happening at all, which is exactly what makes it unbearable for men wired for shouting. You keep doing competent, unglamorous work at whatever rung you currently occupy. You keep your private map of the real decision points updated, quietly, never performing your knowledge of it. You decline the noise. You decline the despair. You let the calendar run. And then, the way it happened to the man in Zurich, the structure and the work arrive at the same place on the same week, with no translation needed between them. He hadn't spent 1917 inventing a strategy on the spot. He'd spent 27 years deciding in advance exactly which lever he would grab. The moment the old order's legitimacy cracked, the loyalty of an exhausted army. The organizational vehicle of the workers' councils already built and waiting. Cadres already trained for the administrative seizure of exactly the right offices in exactly the right city. When the provisional government's authority finally gave way, His vision and the structure's vacancy fit together with no gap between them to close. He didn't have to push his way into the opening. He had been staring at that exact opening for so long that by the time it arrived, it had already been shaped in his own thinking to fit him. That is the entire promise of keeping your eyes on the node instead of demanding your tentacles arrive early. You stop resenting the years your reach can't cover. You stop performing power you don't have. You let your hands stay small and patient while your attention stays fixed on the one point in the structure large enough to matter. For as long as it takes the calendar to turn, the compounding is frictionless precisely because nothing has to be improvised at the end. The vision was already calibrated to the structure years before the structure had any reason to notice you. Decades of nothing, for everyone watching from outside. Then the week where everything you aimed at for that long finally arrives in the same place, at the same time, already fitting.